Well, we are about midway through earnings season. We're also about midway through the earnings from the so-called Magnificent Seven. This is like the nouveau FANG, right? We've heard from Microsoft and from Alphabet and from Meta and from Tesla. We're still awaiting numbers from NVIDIA, from Amazon, and from Apple. And it's the last one that we want to talk about because analysts are pretty uniformly bullish on this company. There are 34 buy ratings on Apple going into its earnings after the close next Thursday. The shares are up 50% year to date. So they're not the best performer among those companies, but 50% ain't bad, right? They've outperformed a lot of competitors. So in the run up to the earnings now, we're trying to figure out, should people indeed be as bullish as the analysts are? And Akiko, there's this sort of debate among the analysts about where we are in the smartphone cycle. How many people are going to be buying the phones?
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about Apple and the stocks run up. I mean, we had sort of the Vision Pro, excitement around that. There's excitement around services. At the end of the day, this is still a company that makes more than half of its revenue from iPhones. A lot of excitement around iPhone 15. Dan Ives, who we have on often, talking about this upgrade cycle, that it's been, I think he said 250 million people who haven't upgraded their phones in 4 years. And so that points to a significant opportunity. Having said that, still waiting for details on iPhone 15. How significant are the features, the upgraded features going to be? And this all comes at a time when smartphone shipments are declining, down more than 20% in the US. Globally, it's down nearly 8%. Are they going to have a product that is exciting enough for people to upgrade? That's the big question.
I'm one of those people who hasn't upgraded in a long time, and I keep thinking about it. Sometimes I'll go on, I'll look at the
basically buying the iPhone 15 just because I need a new phone.
Yeah,
iPhone 11.
I have the 11 also, and I wish that I had gotten the 3 cameras. I just got the 2 cameras.
I have the 3. Yeah. The 12, I think, is where it came in, right?
Right, but no, they had it, and I didn't get the option at the time.
But, I like the camera on my 11, right? And I think that actually does get to not an issue for Apple, but something that we do talk about more when we talk about these products is I have the iPhone 11. It still works relatively well. The camera's really good on it. I can take great photos. So at some point, how do you get people to want to upgrade? And I think that's part of the larger discussion people are having here when it comes to iPhones is these are really good tech now. I might use it for 4 or 5 years. I might buy it less often, right? So then what do you get to? And that's when you get to the services discussion of Apple too, I think, right? And how they're able to make more money off of us from that services side. And I think, Brad, that's going to be a big part of what people watch when we talk about Apple earnings is services, because that's really part of their growth story, right?
It is going to be a big part of it. It continues to be, and I think investors pay close attention to that for good reason. It gives you a little bit into the mind of the consumer, into where they are seeing or cutting back on some of those different types of services that they're buying into, whether that be just how much cloud storage. For one, they finally got me on my cloud storage because
I've been paying
the
for cloud
camera,
storage because I'm not very good at just clearing space.
Exactly, and I've gotten tired of going through that hassle. So for people like Akiko and myself, we have finally bitten the bullet, I should say, and gone all in on just trying to figure out how we can get more cloud storage. All that to say, this is still going to be, and it's projected to be, a sequential move backwards in terms of that revenue. We're actually looking for, based on some of the Bloomberg consensus estimates, the expectation of about $20.7 billion in that services business versus the prior quarter's $20.9 billion. So this would be the first time that we've seen a slight moderation in that services business for about the past year, essentially, as that's on its way to a $80 billion annualized run rate as well this year.
What's interesting to me about Apple and how it performs next week is when you think about the Magnificent Seven, right? All the stocks that we've seen so far. Meta, Alphabet, it is about digital ad revenue, what they're doing in their AI play. Apple's not exactly in that discussion right now. Still, it is about hardware primarily, and then services, increasingly software. If you're looking at the big tech names, how do you judge that valuation?
Right.
It's a different play than the huge run-up that we've seen, which has largely been driven by AI.
And it's interesting, too, I think, when you think about stock reaction and you look at the companies we just mentioned, right? So Meta did well on earnings, Alphabet did well on earnings, the stock reacted well on earnings because in part of how AI is currently driving revenues, right? Specifically at Meta, right? They're saying AI is getting people more engaged, so then you can make more money off people for ads, right? When you really zoom out, that's what Meta is telling you about their AI story. When you look at Microsoft and what they said about AI, they said, well, it's not coming to revenue right now, right? It's going to come to revenue in a little bit, probably second half of next year. We'll start to see that in revenue. But what were analysts doing before earnings for Microsoft that sent it to an all-time high. They were really excited about AI. They were all boosting their price targets, talking about AI contributing to revenue. So I think it's interesting then to think about what's happening with Apple. Everyone's bullish. A lot of people have moved up their price targets, seeing a lot of price targets going up to about $220 right now. I think it's a $190 stock. So interesting to just think about, okay, people are already so bullish going into it. What can you say? And people want third quarter guidance to beat already. They're already talking about that. We think third quarter guidance is going to beat consensus. Maybe consensus should be higher then.
Well, that's true. Like all the time for so many different things. You were talking about the valuations and how we should think about it relative to the others. And I was looking at some of the estimated price to earnings ratios of it relative to competitors. So it's around 32 and a half. And it's kind of right in the middle of the pack. You're looking at everything from an Alphabet that's valued at around 24 times this year's earnings, all the way up to Amazon, which is like at 82. So it is kind of in the middle there. I mean, something else to keep in mind when you're looking at Apple and whether people should own it and do own it, most people who own stocks own Apple.
Yeah.
They just do. And you own it because you own an index fund, you own a mutual fund, you own the S&P 500. Apple is in almost everything,
it's also
right?
been steady gains, right?
Yes.
I mean, Apple has been kind of the reliable sort of grown-up among the big tech names. And so the expectation is there. I mean, this is kind of an important quarter when you think about it because the announcements usually come through in the fall. There's a lot riding on that if we're talking about September. And then, of course, that goes into Christmas season, which is usually one of the biggest quarters for Apple. So, a lot of questions around that. Of course, that is kind of the immediate term question. What's interesting to me is some of these bullish calls that have come through have been on the long-term play. What does this mean for the Vision Pro? I think nobody can really assess exactly how big a driver that's going to be, given how high the price point is. But also, if you look at Citi and why they are bullish on the stock, they've also talked about, India as an opportunity, sort of new markets that are opening up beyond China as they try to diversify. I was telling Josh that I am a little more skeptical around that. This is not going to be sort of, another country of 1 billion people swapping one for the other. But it is an investment that Apple's making, and that's sort of maybe the long-term story to be watching.
Well, it's an interesting thing, too, when we talk about what drives the stock higher, right? Because I do think India is a part of that story throughout this year, and it's a part of things that people have been talking about. But is that really going to be a big part of the earnings call next week? Yeah. Probably not, right? Because it's too forward-looking. So I don't know if you actually get more information on something like that, and that's sometimes why we see these interesting moves post-earnings, too, because some of these things are just too forward-looking. They probably didn't have a lot of revenue growth that's going to impress anyone in India last quarter, and they're not going to have it next quarter.
What's the rebound in China, right? I mean, it's still a big market for Apple, a significant one.
Well, that goes to show it's about where people are buying new phones, and in India for such a long time, and the reason why that Apple had to go in and build out its own retail footprint and offering is because there was a recirculation in that economy of so many of the older products. And so now, if you're already making sure that you're in the hands of so many consumers there on a refurbed product, how do you make sure you get them into or keep them in an ecosystem with a new product as well? So that's India. And then even in the more forward-looking part, Apple could say something amazingly critical just about the mindset of the consumer that could make investors pay attention to the entire market next week. If they come out and say that the consumer that they're seeing right now is showing any signs of cost discretion or any type of decision making that alters the ability to buy into that Pro Max type of model and instead is going down or trading down or modeling down, then the rest of the tech industry is going to have to take some type of attention to that. But it could overflow even into the retailers that are selling some of the electronic products going into this next quarter too.
I think one of the most brilliant things that Apple has done over the past 5 years has been financing of the phones. It used to be you actually had to pony up that money when you bought your iPhone. And now you feel it much less because it's just part of your phone bill every month. So I wonder about the price sensitivity of customers given that change. I don't know what percentage of phones they even sell just out of the box anymore versus being financed.
Well, I was going to say that the price point is certainly going to be interesting, right? That's why we've seen smartphones decline. But also there's an argument to be made that if they sell the iPhone 15 at a higher price, even if they don't sell as many units, ultimately that's going to be a big boost for Apple.
Is this discretionary spending? That was what I was wondering if Brad was saying that. It's not, right?
If you don't need the new phone, right? If this still works and you buy the new one, maybe then it's discretionary.
But I feel like we all just sort of pay it, right? So that's why, to Brad's point, it would be fascinating if they said anything about people spending less, because it seems like something that people just spend on now.
Yeah.
You spent, like the cloud, you probably didn't even flinch, right? You just buy more.
I want to keep my photos.
Yeah, you buy more.
I can't delete any more photos,
right?
Josh.
At the end of the day, you don't want to lose them.
You don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
Locked you in.
But you don't have to go the
got me.
premium phone.
Right.
And that's probably the
true.
difference.
That's true. Well, maybe that's the answer when you're looking at what to do with Apple ahead of earnings. Think about your personal relationship with this company for good and for ill.